As you all probably know by now, the Arkham series is one of the most beloved set of games in the history of gaming, and is considered one of the best franchises in gaming altogether. But within every great gaming franchise, there's always that one that sticks out as the worst. The one that doesn't quite live up to its other games as they should. Well, the Arkham franchise is no different, and the game that holds that reputation is Arkham Origins. Now, just because it's known as the worst game in the entire series doesn't necessarily mean the game is bad. It just means it wasn't as well received by people as the other games were. But contrary to what a majority of the Arkham community thinks, in my opinion, this game isn't as bad as people have been making it out to be since its release. So in this video, we're going to be proving that and doing a deep dive on Arkham Origins and answering the question, was Arkham Origins really that bad of a game? So if you're ready, I am as well. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this, and let me know in the comments what other games you want me to do a deep dive on next, because I come out with videos every Saturday or Sunday depending on what my schedule is like. But let's get into it, shall we? First off, let's go over the story before we get into the meat of everything so that everyone knows what's going on and can be on the same page. And as always, if you'd like to skip this section, just use the timestamps in the description below or use the chapter select option right under the video time bar. Arkham Origins story takes place on Christmas Eve, 2 years after Bruce Wayne takes up the mantle of Batman. The game starts with Batman investigating the Blackgate Penitentiary breakout with Black Mask and Killer Croc leading it, Croc being detained within minutes from the opening. It is then discovered that Black Mask had hired 8 assassins to kill the Batman, with the prize being $50 million. The assassins in question consisted of Killer Croc, Deathstroke, Firefly, Copperhead, Deadshot, Electrocutioner, Lady Shiva, and Bane. All of these villains make an appearance throughout the game, but not all of them have a direct effect on the main story. We'll get into that a little bit later. But midway through the story, it turns out that Sionis wasn't actually the one running the operation the whole time, but it was actually the Joker who impersonated Black Mask and hired the assassins. But along with them, Batman is also battling the police force led by Jim Gordon, who at this point doesn't have the respect for Batman and treats him more as a criminal than a hero. But by the end of the game, Batman manages to defeat all the assassins that were present throughout the story, getting the police force's respect in the process and managing to stop the Joker all in the same night. Until, of course, you get blasted by Mr. Freeze on New Year's Eve in the DLC, but that's not what we're here for today. We're only here for the main game. So let's first tackle the story, since we just went over that. The storytelling in this game is honestly really good looking back at it, since this game is mostly about Batman's early years and him gaining the relationships he has with some of his villains and allies he comes in contact with on the regular later in his life. It really shows the progression from where he started and how people viewed Batman at the beginning to how they view him later on in the Arkham series. It also really delves into both Batman and the Joker's origins, as midway through the game, Joker is admitted into Arkham, where you get to play out the Killing Joke backstory, which is a pretty cool sequence that I can't lie, one of the most unique things I've ever seen in these games altogether. The Mad Hatter section is in the same style as well, and it's honestly really well designed for a character specific section. But moving back to the story at hand, I think out of the entire franchise, it definitely has the second best story out of all the games, with Arkham City sitting at number 1. Its focus on Batman finding his identity and being able to develop the crime fighting techniques that he uses in later games is very well done. And I think the relationship between Bruce and Alfred in this game is probably showcased the best out of all the games and has some of the most unique interactions out of any Batman media. As in this game, Alfred is seen more of a parent worried about Bruce potentially being killed by one of these assassins, and shows that he doesn't have the confidence that Bruce can really become what he wants to be. This scene in particular is always my favorite, as it shows for the first time Alfred trying to stand his ground and telling Bruce how he feels about him being Batman and putting himself in danger, where it seems he hasn't been able to do in the past. By the end of the game, it seems every main character like Batman, Joker, Alfred, and Jim Gordon all find their own identities and sets the fire of what their lives will be from now on. So overall, Origin's story is one of the best in the entire series, especially with the help of the cutscenes, showcasing them off as these are literally the best looking cutscenes in the entire franchise period. I really wish Rocksteady used these styles of cutscenes more than just using the in-game textures for cutscenes, because Arkham Knight's cutscenes would just look so much better in that light. But next up, let's talk about the gameplay, in specific the combat, which is essentially the same as Arkham City. There isn't that big of a mechanical jump from what we see in Arkham City to what we get in Origins, as WB Montreal were the ones that made this game, and it seems like they just worked with the basic mechanics when it came to combat and just expanded on everything else in the game, such as boss fights and unique sections like the Red Hood part, for example. The combat in this game is good as always, as it's the same from Arkham City, but it's pretty disappointing that they didn't change it up a little bit or invent something new to add on to it and just decided to keep it the same. This is the one complaint I've seen time and time again, that there was hardly any innovation in this game, and all the combat mechanics practically stayed the same from the previous game, which honestly isn't a bad thing, because the combat in general is so good already. There wasn't any real reason to change it anyway, especially for a game called Arkham Origins. But I feel like the most they could have done was make it feel different to what we got in the city, and this all goes for the stealth sections as well. But since we're on the topic of combat, let's move on to the boss fights, which is generally agreed upon are the best in the entire series. It's honestly really interesting to me that the only game not to be made by Rocksteady was the game to have the best boss fights out of the entire game series. In general, all the boss fights in this game are really unique in their own way and all play to the strengths of who the person you're fighting is. For example, Lady Shiva's boss fight was essentially the Copperhead boss fight, but way harder because of the martial artist enemies she would spawn in, and you'd have to fight her every time you found one of her hostages. Deathstroke was also really well done and is generally agreed upon the best boss fight in the entire game, as this is the most technically demanding boss fight and is actually really challenging for players not too familiar with the game or combat system. I remember it taking a while to beat because of how accurate you had to be when countering his attacks and also having fast reaction times. And as mentioned before, Mad Hatter's section is definitely the most unique and creative parts in the entire game, and also one of the most disturbing, as once you detain Jervis, Alice just sat there sobbing the entire time, which just makes for both one of the most unique designs in the game to some of the most crushing storytelling in the entire game. But now's the part you've all been waiting for. After glazing this game to the absolute max, here are some of the downsides that this game has, some of the failures, and since we just went over them, let's move back to the boss fights in this game, which of course we just said are amazing and one of the best parts of the game. But the only thing that doesn't sit well with me is how they used some of the assassins in this game, as not all of them appear in the main story. At the beginning of the game, Batman introduces all the assassins and makes them all seem really dangerous to deal with, which would lead you to assume you'd come across them all throughout the main story, right? I think it was really unsatisfying that some of the assassins in the game were restrained to side missions rather than being part of the main storyline. Like, even after the main story is over and the Joker is taken in, you can still partake in these side missions even though they won't be paid by the Joker if they manage to kill you, which doesn't make sense to the story in general. In my opinion, we did get better boss fights in this game for people like Deadshot and Deathstroke who didn't have as good of boss fights in other games, but I think Lady Shiva and Deadshot were definitely robbed of really good story elements in this game. Like, even Riddler was somewhat part of the main story as you run into his jammers throughout the game anyways, but this is the only critique from me when it comes to the boss fights and the storytelling. But as for the gameplay itself, it's just all around really glitchy and buggy even all these years later. When you take down enemies, they seem to fly in any direction at random, and some of them even start floating in the air when they're beaten. It's all really bizarre and weird for a game like this going off from City to have so many bugs within it, especially to do with one of the main elements in this game, which is combat. But one of the main elements in this game that I always had an issue with was how short the game felt in retrospect to the other games in the series. I don't know if you guys got the same feeling, but after the Bane fight ended, I thought there'd be a lot more to go in the game rather than just ending right then and there. I honestly thought there would be a couple more hours of content rather than it just randomly ending after one boss fight, and then all of a sudden you're just fighting the Joker in the chapel to end the game. It just feels unfinished and sort of rushed for an ending. But now with the cons out of the way, we've reached the conclusion of the video and we can finally answer the question you've all been waiting to be answered. Was Arkham Origins really that bad of a game? And from everything said throughout this video and all the facts I've stated, I'm gonna say no. This wasn't that bad of a game, and it wasn't a bad game in general. I personally think the reputation the game carries of it being a major weak point in the Arkham series is very undeserved, because it literally brought three of the most important things to the table that some of the other Arkham games straight up failed to do. It had amazing cutscenes that didn't use game textures, it had an amazing story, and actually had amazing boss fights the whole way through. The boss fights in this game are some of the biggest highlights from the entire Arkham franchise, and not even Arkham City, which is considered to be the best Arkham game in the series, had the best boss fights, as mentioned in my deep dive about that game. So overall, this game definitely doesn't deserve the hate it gets when it comes to being the worst Arkham game in the entire series, because it really wasn't a bad game, and I still go back to enjoy the game for what it is and what WB Montreal had to work with following Arkham City. But you guys let me know in the comments below what you guys think about the game, because this game definitely deserves more credit for what it was when it released. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope you all are enjoying the Arkham content I've been releasing as of recently. I have to give my friend Annoying Dreamers some credit, because he's the one that gave me the idea to try making these kinds of videos, and it turned out being very enjoyable, and it seems like you guys have been really liking it as well. Click on the bat symbol to check out my deep dive on Arkham City, which I mentioned during the conclusion, because if you like this one, you'll definitely like that one. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all next week with another video. Peace!